What happened was I was writing a scholarly research paper on protest songs in Cape Breton. I knew that these songs existed, and when I was in the archive doing some digging around, I discovered quite a few of these songs, primarily from the 1920s. I started thinking, well, Cape Breton has this wonderful group of musicians here, young musicians. My daughter Bria MacKinnon plays and performs and knows a lot of these musicians, and Vic Tomiczek, who's a friend, knows these. So I had a meeting with Vic and said, listen, Vic, what about the idea? Here are these songs that I've done a lot of work on, and what about the idea of getting some musicians involved, and we could record some of these. And then there were some other people who came on board too. There were a number of professors at the university who were also musicians who played in various bands over the years. So when they heard about the project, they wanted to get involved too.
So I sent out an initial blast to a bunch of my friends and colleagues in the music industry, and was really impressed and surprised about how excited people were to be involved in a project like this. There's been incredible groundswell of interest from local musicians once the idea perforated throughout the community to actively want to become involved because it's just a cool project.
Yeah, well, each one is different. And again, a lot of we've discovered some that were locally composed, that were composed here in Cape Breton. Some that were composed in other places. Now, for some of them, we did know. We do know the names of the composers. For one very important composer was a guy named Don Fraser, who's published a whole series of books of poetry in the 1920s, and some of his poetry became songs. Another very important guy was a guy named Joe Wallace, who was a member of the Communist Party of Canada, and he was a poet as well and wrote a couple of songs. So we do know some of the names of some of the composers, but for some of them we don't know. And I suspect that some of these songs were sung and I don't know if they were ever recorded, but they were sung at things like labor rallies, sung at community gatherings, sung at certainly during times of strike.
It creates a link between Cape Breton's labor history and our 21st century experience here, premiering one of the kind of sadder parts is how relevant the labor struggle poetry of the 20s and 30s of Cape Breton is to today and in contemporary time, because a lot of the laments of the workers and poets then are really the same problems that a lot of workers are dealing with today.
There's two kind of things I see as really important in that number one is that it kind of reacquaints Cape Bretoners with these older historic songs that really did play an important role in our communities, and things that we all take for granted, like the 8-hour day and pensions and having a fair wage, all those kinds of things that we just take for granted. Those were hard fought battles, and many of those battles took place in the 1920s when these songs were composed, and so many of these songs raise those issues, and so I think from that point of view they're very important historical documents. There's another interesting thing that it was kind of a secondary thing that I'm really happy about, that many of the musicians who have recorded these songs are now playing these songs in their own sets, and in a sense they've breathed life into these older songs and they've kind of reacquainted them with them, and so in a sense that's kind of sustaining tradition in a way. It's kind of it's taking these older songs and kind of reviving them in a sense, putting them back into circulation so they'll be alive for another generation.